Welcome back, everyone. Few days ago, President Trump released a few private messages that the French President Macron had sent to him. And it's an interesting message that the French president sent. And I would like to quickly read out exactly what he said, and I want to quote because what he said is quite fascinating in explaining the actual relationship between the United States and other NATO countries. Here is what President Macron said to President Trump. My friend, we are totally in line with Syria. We can do great things on Iran. I don't understand what you are doing on Greenland. What Macron was actually telling President Trump is that we should stay together. We can invade and plunder other countries, meaning non European, non Western countries, and we are with you, as they have been under NATO. But what Macron is saying, he doesn't understand why Trump wants to grab Greenland. And what he's basically saying, we should be together invading and plundering these other countries, but not between each other. In a sense, what Macron is saying to Trump is don't dip your pen in the company's ink. And what this brings out is that these former colonial countries or still neo-colonial rulers and the United States have been busy looting the world, and now what has happened is that the United States is turning on its allies. And Macron is trying to tell Trump, let us stick together so that we can continue to plunder together more efficiently. But what Macron doesn't understand is that Trump is not interested in plundering together. What he wants a cold cake for the United States. And this is something that has upset many of his European partners. And so they have taken exception over Trump's claim to grab Greenland. Having said that, a word of caution is necessary. It is very common for analysts, reporters, and so on to refer to the government policies by as if it is the policy of the individual. It's a sort of a shorthand to explain what the country is doing. And what is behind these policies are the elite, the financial, banking, and defense industry elites who are actually formulating the policy. And politicians like Trump and Macron are merely the salesmen. They merely are the public face of this very private deep state. And this is a point that many of the liberals in the West seem to miss every time. Or rather, what they do is they use the name of the leader as a shorthand to refer to the policies of the deep state. And before you know it, they start imagining that it's really the individual who's formulating policies. It is absurd to claim that an individual like Donald J. Trump can formulate policies for Iraq, Afghanistan, or Venezuela, or Greenland, or Canada. All these countries are very complex and they require very specialized team of analysts and policymakers to formulate what has to be done. And having formulated it, then they hand it over to the president, and his job is to sell the plan to the rest of the world but more importantly, sell the plan to the American public. More importantly, the white American public. So, what we have is also a difficulty the liberals in the West have in trying to identify what actually Trump or Macron or Starmer in Britain, what they're actually aiming at. By reducing it to the individual, and you will find very often they don't refer to the state policies, they really talk about foreign policy. And by foreign policy, they reduce it to the individual politician whom they think is formulating the policy out of his own understanding. So, where does that take us from you? My interest more is in terms of what this way of analyzing has on the thinking of, of analysts in our part of the world, in South Asia. They too instinctively follow the same pattern. They try to divine some reason why a politician in the West is promoting a certain set of policies. So they try to imagine his individual interests. Maybe, as in the case of Trump, they focus on what they call his transactional approach to politics. Yes, the ambitions and behavior of different politicians and their values does play a role in international relations, but they're all governed and and restricted by the general program set out by the deep state, by the oligarchs, by the banking sector, and of course the military industrial complex. So it will be good to dive deeper into see how these European colonial powers, now actually more neo-colonial powers, how they are trying to hold on to an alliance which they need to continue to loot the what they call the third world. And part of this alliance to continue the neo-colonial extraction of wealth is what we call the British Commonwealth or the Francophone Association. They maintain these associations ostensibly for the benefit of the former colonial countries, but actually it is primarily for the benefit of the former colonial powers.
Um, would you like to say, you said something about how the thieves are falling out over Greenland. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, they're falling out because they used to work together to enrich themselves at the expense of Asia and Africa and Latin America. Now, for the first time, these Western powers are eating into each other's turf, as it were. But this is nothing new. If one goes back to the First World War, that war was really an inter-imperialist war where the different major industrial powers fought to divide and redivide their colonies. And the Second World War was, in a sense, an extension of that. So, what has happened now is that these imperial countries, which have now turned into neo-colonial rulers, they tend to see this as a matter of sticking together between the United States and European powers. sticking together against China. And that is a major reason why now they are beginning to cannibalize each other. They are unable to put up a fight against China, so they are eating into each other's wealth. And an important reason for that is that China is actually clawing away the markets and the resources that these former colonial powers have been accessing through their neo-colonial networks. But China has been gradually eating into that base. For instance, China is today the largest trading partner for almost 180 countries in the world. Now, this is a major problem for these Western powers because now they have to compete with China to buy the resources, not invade and take over. So, for them, having to compete with China to access the resources and the markets is something they find difficult to do. They don't have the economic heft in order to compete and win. So, one, they're pulling down the shutters, or as the Americans would call it, circling the wagons in the Western Hemisphere. So, we have Trump who says the Western Hemisphere is out of bounds for external, extra regional powers, by which, of course, he means China and Russia, that they shouldn't come and poach in America's backyard, as they put it. So, what they are now struggling to do is, on the one hand, keep together this alliance of thieves who had successfully looted large parts of the world for the past 200 or 300 years, and at the same time, keep China under control. And here, the psychological element is that for the first time in more than 300 years, an Asian power has risen to the position of a superpower. Until now, for the past 300 or 400 years, it was the Western, white, or European powers that were considered dominant. But for the first time now, an Asian power has arisen and is showing that it can actually control large parts of the world. This is something that is frightening the Western countries, Western powers, and also the Western people also by and large. For instance, you you may have come across this theory, this so-called replacement theory, that in the West, the white population is being replaced by colored immigrants. So there is a sense, also the right-wing ideologues argue, is that very soon the white population, which they say is a minority in the world, which is true, they are not more than 13%, that over time the white population will disappear. It's a kind of a doomsday scenario that they're putting out in order to mobilize support among their people to control immigration into their countries, and at the same time also use that as an excuse to concentrate political power in the hands of the white elite. So what you're facing today, in my view, is that in the West, they're moving towards a fascist arrangement where they want to monopolize political power for the white people and marginalize the colored population. And one example of that, or shall I say, one outcome of that attitude, is the United States program to arrest and deport colored people. And Trump started it on the pretext of arresting illegal immigrants. But very soon, the data is showing that they are trying to arrest anyone and everyone who is what they call colored and deport them as far as possible. And partly that is uh, because of their need to discourage further immigration. So if they treat the immigrants so badly, they assume that no more immigrants would ever enter the country in the future, and therefore make sure that their countries remain white majority societies.
Thank you. That was very good and clear.